Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a good last day at SIGGRAPH. Is anybody tired yet? No, not tired. I'm super tired. Okay, so currently I work at Theory Accelerated. It's a software company where we develop Axiom, and Axiom is a sparse GPU accelerated volumetric deterministic fluid solver. I'm going to show you a lot of cool explosions about Axiom very soon. I don't have an up-to-date show reel, but here's my website. You know, if you guys want to check out my work, you can just go to urbanbradesko.com. I do a lot of photography as well if you're into that, and videography. Cool, good stuff. So I'm going to be talking about, I'm super passionate about explosions, okay? So I'm going to be talking about art directing explosions, or what I like to call controlling chaos. Because usually it's hard to control explosions. And in most cases, you don't really want to control them. You just want to give them the right inputs, and then the solver will do its thing. But there is you can get bad or good explosions. So hopefully by the end of the talk, you're going to see how and why, what's the difference between a good or a bad explosion. This is the overview. So I'm going to be quickly going through the artistic principles of effects and animation, because that all ties into how to make good explosions. I'm going to show you how to control chaos with the new grains emitter. I think we're going to call it the ultimate explosions emitter. I'm not sure yet. So yeah, then I'm going to do the overview on it. Then we have some good stuff. I don't know what that is. Then I'm going to show you how to do a poor man's scatter shader. So, we have the pyrobake in Houdini already, and it's all great. But I think you really need to, if you want to control explosions, you do need to know how to maybe open it up, break it apart, and rebuild it on your own to really have that precise control over your shader. And then some other good stuff for the end. Okay, artistic principles of effects. Well, I'm going to talk about value, color, shapes, and timing. And all of this is so important, not just for explosions, but just for effects in general. But you'll see that I'll be referencing some of the, there's a very cool guide by League of Legends from Riot on how they approach effects. So I'll be showing you some of that, and then I'll be borrowing from Jason Kaiser. He did like a 4-hour presentation on artistic principles, and I'll try to condense it into 15 minutes. But yeah, this is the guide, and I really encourage you guys to check it on your own. It just goes through how Riot is using the principles of effects to create the effects for League of Legends. And all of this applies to explosions. So bear with me while I quickly go through the thing. So value, super important. Essentially in explosions, the value would relate to, how hot is your temperature, how hot is your core, but all of that is going to give you focus. It's going to tell you where to look at in a shot. In this case, you can see on the left, there's a certain lack of focus, but when you add the hot core in the middle of the effect, you immediately get that focus back. And it's the same for explosions, right? So we have this thing here. This is the scatter shader that we're going to be looking at later. And usually, the tip of the explosion is hot, obviously, but it also directs your attention. Because we, as humans, we always look at the brightest spot or the thing that is moving the fastest. Color, usually with explosions, we're going to use the gunpowder kind of color palette, which is the black body shader. But for video games, you also have different elements like the frost elements or arcane. But color is still very important. Maybe you're doing magical explosions. Maybe you're doing magical fire. So it's good to know these things. And when it comes to color for explosions, let's say we have this dust explosion. I feel like in a lot of movies, they just use like a gray shader, where maybe adding just a bit of color would really go a long way. So, and I forget to add color all the time, but it's good to have. For instance, we're going to be looking at this scene later, more towards the end. But at the bottom, there's no color. At the top, there's color. And if this was actually rendered, it would really help to tie everything together in the shot. And by the way, this is all using Axiom, and all of the sims were, I think, under 2 minutes to sim all of this. If it's more than 2 minutes, I don't care anymore. I don't wait for anything. So shape language, I feel like for explosions, this is the most important part, is getting your shapes correct. So at the bottom, we have the correct shapes. At the top, we kind of have the no-no shapes. And you can kind of see Jason at the bottom left. It's right there. So that's a part of his presentation that's super long, and I'm trying to condense it here. But yeah, if you have like a box, don't just have a box, like kind of taper it at the end. If usually you don't want anything that's super symmetrical. If you have like a blast, you want it to be directional and not kind of going into itself. You know, everything that, when you see this, it's like, of course, makes sense. But a lot of times people ask me, like, how, like, they show me their explosions, and that's exactly what they're lacking. And I'm like, well, you need to fix your fundamentals before you can actually start creating good explosions. Same here, you know, you don't want things to be symmetrical. You want to push them up, almost create that golden circle type of thing. Shape, also super important. You never want to have just medium shapes or just small shapes. You kind of want to do a proper hierarchy. And I usually refer to, well, this is kind of, that's one of the explosions we're going to be looking at. And I feel like here I got a good ratio of shapes. You know, you get a good silhouette, you have one big bottom and then a few medium shapes and then a lot of small shapes. And that kind of, well, that's how it looks like when you actually play it. And then ties into the Fibonacci sequence. I'm always talking about this, but honestly, everything in nature and in life is just built based on this Fibonacci sequence. And usually when I'm looking at explosions, I look at them as trees, right? So you have this one big trunk, you have a bunch of branches, and then have like a lot more leaves on the top. So this ties into the golden circle. So that's how I kind of look at explosions as well. Principles of animation. Obviously, explosions are usually super fast at the beginning, and then they kind of taper off. So we don't need all of the principles for making explosions, but definitely anticipation, squash and stretch. All the explosions are usually stretching like crazy. And you'll see soon, I'll show you where I was doing some crazy examples where I was stretching and squashing them just to get that really, almost like a stylized push to them. Exaggeration, for instance, or secondary action is very important for your trails, your sparks, everything like that. Here's just another representation of that. But the way I think about it is, and this is a quote from Jason, is lead the brain with anticipation, overload the brain at the moment, like where the climax happens, and then give the brain time to process what just happened. And that kind of looks like that. So this is a bit stylized. That's not exactly how a real nuclear explosion would go off. But I'm using, you see all the squashing and stretching that's happening, all the secondary motion. I'll play it again because it's cool. At the beginning, we already have the explosion and we're kind of anticipating, what's going to happen. And then it's like, boom, like really using the timing and the anticipation to its maximum effect. And then you get to the climax and then you kind of leave it to expand, and your brain is like, oh, that's very cool, and you're kind of just realizing what's happening. So here's an example where animation plus effects are using all the principles in combination. You can see when the animation goes back, there's where the anticipation happens, and then punches down, that's where the payoff is, and then you have secondary elements like sparks and tiny little embers and stuff flying. So that's how I look. I look at this and I'm like, how can I use this on explosions, essentially? It's a good reference point. Obviously, this is more for stylized, if you want to over-stylize your explosions, but if you want to make realistic explosions, that you just need to look at a lot of references for real explosions. But this is kind of the 4 principles of animation that are the most useful. So squash and stretch, anticipation, I feel like is the best one. Acceleration, deceleration, and then the secondary action. And timing is super important. Like you saw in the nuclear explosion, we have the small burst first, and then it really quickly expands, and then it slowly kind of raises to the top. So this is kind of, it's a good guide when you're, always try to use curves, never do anything linear. It's like with the shapes, right? Once you understand that nothing is supposed to be linear or like just a box, everything kind of, you can look at timing the same way, even like in music or in movies or in filmmaking, all of these principles are kind of the same. So when we're talking about timing, we can animate a lot of things, right? With position, we can animate the velocity, we can animate scale, transparency, color, like pretty much everything, right? And it gets super complicated. And an easier way of looking at it is just animating your intensity over time, right? So never do it linearly. For example, explosions would go bam and then slowly dissipate. And using your 4 principles plus this intensity logic, you get something like this. So the effect, just to get some context for this, the effect on the left is a damaging effect. The effect on the right is a healing effect. So you can see the curve has the anticipation, the climax, and then the fall off. But a healing effect will go off immediately and then just have the fall off. But that's more for if you're working in video games, that's super important. Not so important for explosions, but still you can see the intensity curve and how timing was used for this. Well, that's a good explosion. But obviously it's super stylized. So what as an exercise for this, I wanted to kind of replicate what they did here. This is not for realistic explosions, but if you want to over stylize it a bit, this is a good thing to do. So if you can see, I slowed it down quite a lot. You have that first fire blast, and then it almost disappears, and there's a flash of a white screen that happens. You'll see it. So we have the fire going up, there's a shockwave already, disappears, flash, and then the explosion goes up. Those are all the principles that I'm talking about, like the anticipation and then the payoff. You can even see the anticipation is happening with the flickering lights. It's crazy. Like it happens so fast, you don't see it, you just feel it when it happens. That's why I'm slowing it down quite a lot here. So if we look at this explosion, it already has a lot of good things going for it. But if we add that blast at the beginning, it's like that. You can really feel it, right? And then if you add some lens flares and maybe like another shockwave of condensation, it really adds to the actual impact, right? Again, not super realistic, but something to think about when you're doing explosions. Oh yeah, so I'm just going to show you a few cool examples. Very cool. But this is essentially, I think, like this is using all the principles to its maximum potential. But you can see how all the principles are again in effect. And what I do is I literally go frame by frame almost and see how everything is built up and how they're releasing it. And that's how, when I'm looking at explosions, I'm trying to implement all the principles and everything to the explosion emitter. So yeah, like me and Mai are developing this together. We're gonna I'll try to make the best explosions emitter out there. It's gonna be very flexible. So I'm gonna make a bunch of presets for dust explosions, for big explosions, for nuclear explosions, and it's all based on the grains. Also, like this was very cool. This is where I kind of started getting the idea for using. This is like an older presentation from ILM where they were showcasing Plume. It's very cool. I like Plume a lot, but it was like here. When I saw this, I was like, oh, you can use particles. as emitters. And that is a part of the philosophy of controlling chaos, because all the explosions are so chaotic, but with particles, you can kind of direct the shapes, you can kind of direct where it's going to go. And also in this case, they were, doing an RBD simulation and then emitting points and then using that as emitters. And we usually, we know this by now. There's a bunch of emitters already out there that are kind of using this, but this is an example when I did a few explosions with RBD. That's how I kind of started developing the emitter, was with RBD, doing stuff like this. This is still like all RBD-based emitters. And cool slow motion. That's how the emitter looked. And then you add some trails to it, and that's it. But that led me to the grains emitter, because I feel like with grains, you really get that chaotic look, but you can kind of direct the shapes. You can make it more chunky, more spray, as you'll see in a second. So the emitter is built out of 3 parts. The first part is where we actually do the shapes. This is how the sim looks like. And it's so easy and so simple to change the shapes and recache it. Like you almost don't have to wait for it. And yeah, here you can pretty much do whatever you want. I'm doing a simple dot product to control the width of the emitter, but you can make it wider, you can make it more narrow, and it's just going to go up. But you can pretty much do your custom emitters here. You can change your shape however you want. If you're familiar with grains, you need to do the thing called the attraction weight. So I'm just using a simple noise here. The attraction weight essentially is going to dictate the clumps and the clumping that's happening. So you'll see here, everything that's white is going to stick together. It's going to give you a clump. And then you just use this as your emitter. Oh, you can also create an age field like this if you guys are wondering, because you don't get age by default. And then I'm bringing in the velocity with this PC open. Super simple stuff. I don't even know why I'm showing this here. I'm gonna skip. Cool. And then another cool feature is this glue constraint. And that's gonna give you even more like interesting shapes, almost like flesh in a way. But it also can work for mud or, just like debris. Because you can use, after you have the sim, you can use grains and actually render them as well with the explosion. It's going to look very cool. Here are a few controls to just control the actual scale at the beginning. And I'm using just a simple time and then fitting that, putting that through a ramp to control the speed of how it's animated at the beginning. Adding some punch. Again, going back to the time kind of principles, you really want it to be punchy in the beginning and then slow down towards the end. This part is optional. Sometimes I get this middle chunk that could be, sometimes it gives me too much temperature or too much pressure, so you can just remove it entirely from the emitter, or you can slowly dissolve it like I'm doing here. And this is, again, just based on time. And once it reaches a certain threshold, it's just going to remove all the points. And by the way, we're going to be releasing this emitter to the public, so you guys can then check it out, how it's all done on your own, or even change it, add stuff to it. So that's the first part. The second part is the life generation. I did show you can generate a life age attribute in the DOP, but in this case, I was doing my own just to have more control. This part is for generating the chunks. So anything that's white is just going to stay alive for a bit longer. And you get that by just creating a PC find radius. And this is where the actual life is then being generated. And it's quite simple. I'm just using time, essentially, like the frame, and then dividing it by a number. So in this case, dividing it by 30. So when it hits 30, that's where it's going to be at 0. And then you can add random noises to it, to kind of offset the life based on a noise. So some chunks are still going to be alive for longer than others, and just it gives you that organic look. Again, controlling chaos. It's difficult. You kind of don't want to control it, but you do want to shape it a bit. So that's the main life, and then on the left, there's the random generation. So then you can combine them to get even more random life. You can see some chunks are still alive when they're on the ground. Here's a simple example of how the randomness looks like. So it's quite organic, but it's not using any simulation. It's just everything is based on this, on frame, essentially, just using frame. And if you don't refit your frame, it's going to look like this, which is just going to be white. But then once you start fitting it, let's say between, I think it was 10 and 50, then you get a nice, smooth, linear value. And then what you can do is you can use noise, right? Use your noise and push it into the negative values. So essentially you're pushing some points back in time like that. And that will give you the organic, almost feels like it's a growth solver, but it's all just based on noises and time. Yes, you can invert it as well. So here I'm putting it into another noise and fitting that, and that gives you another layer of complexity. Yeah. And then I'm combining it with just this, again, using the frame, and then you divide it by a number. And if at frame 50, it's going to hit 0, or you can invert it. And then if you combine all of that, you're going to get a very, well, I think it's a very cool effect. And then you can use that to dictate your life of your grains. Cool. So after that, well, you can also, here I'm just a simple example, how you can use it to generate like a linear wipe, but I'll skip that for now. So the rasterization part, we get our grains, we trail them, and then we connect the points together. You need to trail your emitters, otherwise you're going to get stepping. You can fix that by adding more substeps in the sim, but it's just easier if you just have a longer trail like that. And then you rasterize all the fields. So the live field is the most important one here, because I'm then multiplying everything down by that life field. And that will just ensure that when they come close to their life, everything's going to slowly dissipate. And then blasting and VDB, deactivating the fields, just so it's a bit faster and easier to cache out. So that's the left side. The right side is pretty much the same thing, but longer. So this is the trick here. Like you need the right side. So everything that's blue is actually going to be your influence field. That's where you're pumping in your velocity. In Pyro, it's called the pump field, but in Axiom, it's called the influence field. And this is important because this will prevent the mushrooms happening. And you can play around with it. You can make it a bit longer, a bit less long. It's up to you. But this will actually prevent the mushrooming from happening. Because if you ever try to do long like trails, usually they always turn into mushrooms. But this will actually make it like taper super nicely. And if you want, you can also make the life a bit longer for your influence than your main life. But it's not, in some cases, it's not super necessary. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And then you get stuff like this. So with the emitter, you can then just create different types of emitters. So 3 different types. And then I simmed all 3 of them. They look like this when they're separately simmed, which is pretty cool. So you can see the one on the left. That's what I'm talking about. Like you don't get mushrooms. Like it really tapers nicely and so softly into a nice organic explosion. And then you start combining them, and you get this. And we get, when I was talking back with the Fibonacci sequence, we get a lot of super small, tiny trails. We get a few medium shapes, and then, the core. So it really, everything ties back into the Fibonacci sequence. And they kind of look like trees, right? Explosions kind of look like trees anyway. Yeah. And then when you combine all of that and you add a bit of a shockwave, you get a cool little explosion. Okay, so another way of controlling your explosions is with the shader. So this is this is the scatter shader. I call it the poor man's scatter shader because we already have a good implementation in Houdini, but I think if you really want to control it, you kind of have to know how it's made and then maybe make your own. You can add features, remove features. It's really up to you. This is the simulation that we're going to be using. And I think this sim had like, what was it? 500 million voxels. And it took under 2 minutes to sim. So I think this is going to be the new 1 minute explosion once I tweak it a bit. But in this case, I'm just using basic pyro burst. Nothing super advanced here. Yep. And then punching that through Axiom. Like I said, I think it was 2.5 minutes to sim this one, which is pretty crazy for the amount of voxels that we're getting. Special thing here that I actually used color as a fake temperature. You'll see that in a second. On the left, in this case, I'm removing temperature because I don't need it. And then on the right, I'm creating my new temperature. Well, I'm just calling it my temp. And then here, I'm putting c.x into my temp. So I'm using just the x component of my color, putting that into temperature. And once you do that, and just rename the temperature back again, you get this, right? So this is the poor man's scatter generator. So you can see here, this is the color. It's the same, but I'm just using it for temperature. On the left, this is the actual temperature. The reason why I did this was because the temperature, for some reason, the actual temperature at the beginning wasn't bright enough, but the color temperature was super bright at the beginning. So I just combined the two of them. Just a hack. Also, if you separate the temperature, sometimes the temperature cools down too fast. So you can just say, don't cool down, just go up all the time. And then use your color to actually make the real temperature, just to have more control. So this is the real temperature. That's how it looks like here. So if you ever dived into the pyro bake, it looks like this. And we're using temperature to create the scatter field, right? And then what you have to do is you just blur your scatter field a few times and multiply that by your density. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. Using my temperature. You can downsample it if you want to, just so it's not 1-to-1. It's going to help quite a lot because it's all about blurring the temperature a bit. So you blur it, convert it, rename it, refit it, however you want. Just call it scatter. And then you just blur it a few times. You can combine the blurring. So that's how it looks like with different kind of blurring steps. And then you combine all of them. And this is a simple way to preview it. In the actual pyrobake, they're doing some more advanced things, so the preview is better. But this is the poor man's version of that. But it gives you the same results, essentially. Very similar results. So here I was getting two scatter shaders, two scatter fields, and what you just have to do is combine them. You can use the pyro post process to combine fields with the same name, which is very convenient. And then at the bottom, I'm creating a mask. So this mask is going to be quite important for later. What I essentially have is the velocity. I have the density here, making another field from density called a mask. And then the VDBs, I'm just smoothing the VDBs and then creating a gradient field as well. A gradient is essentially like your normal vectors for your volumes. And based on that, I'm doing a dot product between the gradient and the velocity to get this mask. So this mask you can then use in the shader to do whatever you want. Here's a simplified version of how the gradient works, in case you guys don't know. But yeah, if I just put it into the gradient back to the points, I do the dot product between the gradient and this vector coming from this point. This is the mask you're getting. Essentially, it's super simple stuff, but it's a good way to mask. You'll see how valuable that mask is in a second. You can also just use your density as a mask, like I'm doing here, refit your density values, or you can also use just your normal temperature as a mask, like so. Cool. So once you have all of that, we have all the fields created, we have the masks created, we can jump into Solaris, and this is the shader. This is the explosion, and with the shader, this is how it looks like. When I'm back home, I'll try to rebuild this so it works with XPU as well. So this one right now is just CPU based. We can see the different masks that we're going to be using. For instance, this is that suit mask that we were creating, and it's essentially where the burning is not fully complete. We are getting this dark. We want to create this darker volume, darker smoke, right? And this is where we create the suit mask to use to blend between dark and normal density. The density mask here is that's the actual multiplier that's multiplying the scatter down. So you can create very crispy results based on that. The hot core is just to amplify the hotness at like very specific points on the scatter. This one was really fast to render, actually, but I think with XPU, it's just going to be almost like real time. So it's very cool. This is how the density itself looks like. And here, if you go to that suit mask that we created before, so this is why this mask is so important, because based on this, you can kind of mix between the dark areas of the, like that, right? So everything that's red, usually I would just set that to pure black. And that's going to really punch the scatter shader to its maximum effect. Because if you don't have that, then your explosion is just going to be that one color, like usually gray. Yes, tweaking the values. Very interesting. And yeah, so without the mask, you get this, right? Which is not as poppy. When you add the mask, you can see how much contrast we're getting back. And the mask is also something you can do whatever you want. You can create it in different ways. For here, I'm using temperature, but you can use fuel. You can use change the temperature, refit it to your needs. Okay, so let's actually go inside the shader so you guys can see how that is made. It's actually super simple. It's pretty much just plugging in a bunch of fields, pushing them, let's say the scatter field, you push it through a fit just so you can refit it, put it through a ramp for the color. This is the hot core mask, just using the X component, refitting it, and then using it as a bias between the hot core and the normal scatter, right? Very simple stuff, just like a few refits, multiplying. So this is the hot core and how it looks like. This is the fit controls for that. So you can really specify which part of the explosion do you want it to be super hot. After that, you can combine that with your fire. I don't use fire a lot, but maybe I should. Fire is just based on your temperature, and then you create this inverse kind of ramp to create the pockets, like the dark pockets and the bright pockets, and then you just combine this. But the main part, if you guys don't know about this, the whole scatter shader is the multiplication with the density, right? And that's coming from, okay, I'm going to show it in a second, from this top part. And again, it's essentially just a ramp, like so. And what you do is you multiply the temperature, like the scatter field that we created, with the density, like so. And that is called density X scatter. And once you plug that into your CE, which is the color, you're going to get essentially the final result. So super simple. So, you know, just in case you guys ever wondered how the scatter shader is made, it's like this. And then I'm also using the opacity that comes from the density to multiply it again on top. And then obviously you can also export the other AOVs like intensity, the density, mask, so you can use them for compositing later. That's pretty much it when it comes to the scatter shader. I mean, this is the suit mask. Again, the same thing, put it through a few fits, use it as a bias, so you can then blend between normal density and the dark density. But yeah, that's how the scatter shader looks like in a nutshell. Oops. Heli crash. So this is, I literally did this a few days before I traveled to SIGGRAPH, but I really wanted to show you how cool, because this is all using grains and the explosion emitter. I thought it was looking pretty cool. So here's another camera, another view from the sim, and then I also put it through color, because usually, especially if you have ground, then you can just take the color from the ground to color your smoke. I'll show you how that was done as well. Just fast forward this a bit. But this is the sim. Those are the grains being emitted from the propellers. And in this case, we didn't have the life, like the H field. So this is how I did it. I essentially trailed points, and then I transferred that attribute back onto the grain. And you do that with the prim UV. So the way that, okay, just gonna fast forward a bit. So the way the prim UV works is essentially it's fetching the data from the primitive, and I'll show you here in a second. Here I'm using the XYZ distance to get the primitive and the UV attribute. And after you have that, you can just tell it, well, just give me that information from the primitive that you hit. So here's a sphere. And you can see, the sphere is going to attach to the geometry, and it's also going to pick up that color. So that's essentially what I'm doing on the grains to fetch the color from those curves that you saw earlier. Yeah, so that's the same logic that's happening inside of here. So now the grains are going to have this pseudo life attribute. And based on that, you can then multiply everything down like I was doing in the emitter. In this case, I'm also using the ground to get the color, because that's, like I said, quite an important aspect of explosions, is to have proper color. But everything else is pretty much the same then as the explosions emitter that we were looking at before. You kind of trail your emitter just so you don't have to substep it. And you can see how it's slowly dying off, like very organically. Yeah, generating the light field, and then like before, multiplying everything down by that life field, like so. Yeah. And then just cache it out. So in this, after you have your sim, you can do a bunch of tricks on it. You can refit the density to kind of normalize the values. Sometimes you have density that's super dense and some parts that are not as dense. So if you refit your density like so, you can see it becomes much smoother. A lot of times that's going to help quite a lot. But in this case, because I was using color, there's a cool trick here that I do as well. Yes, go inside. You can do it. Yes. Yes, okay. No, go back. So I'm using color, and then I'm putting that through a RGB to hue, saturation, and value, and then you can split those elements and control them separately. So the fit is controlling the value. So if some parts are too dark, you can then refit them. Or like in the middle, that's just the saturation. So you can boost up your saturation that way. So again, just to give you more control over your color on your volumes. It's very cool. And then on the right, I added just that's the explosion emitter. The big explosion that happens is just like a separate emitter on top. Looks like that. And you can see here is very apparent how the density, some density areas are way too dense and then some are not as dense. And then after you put them through the refit, kind of all just clicks together, right? Yeah, and then adding some color on top. And that's pretty much it. I don't know what I was showing you later here as well. Yeah, I'll just skip this. It's not important. Cool. All right. So some other cool stuff that I wanted to show you are clouds. Not sure if you're passionate about clouds, but I am. I have 1,000 pictures of clouds on my phone, and these are all Axiom sims. And then, you know, just kind of blows my mind how good and realistic these clouds are looking. And I think like the render times were super low on this as well. But the render was done by Samuel Kruger, so just wanted to give him a shout out. Here's another render of the clouds. Super nice and fluffy. And another one here. Okay, so one of the announcements that I wanted to do was we have Axiom running on the iPad now. So, and you can get it on the App Store for free. So if you have an iPad, especially the M1 chips, Axiom is pretty much running in real time on the iPad, which is pretty insane. Granted, the shader here is not the best. It's a bit cartoony, but you know, you can try it and play around with Axiom on the iPad, which is quite insane. Here I'm gonna do a little explosion soon. There you go, a little blast. So this was I'm gonna stop it, sorry. This was a project that we started a few months ago, and I kind of showed it at GDC, but this was the final version, like the render. But you can see here all of the kind of how fast and easy it was to set up. So yeah, because I was using Axiom on this, like all the simulations were below, like under 1 minute, and I was just like literally in 2 hours, I had all the sims done. It was very, and this is going to be one of the workshops that we're going to be doing at Theory Accelerated Studios. So Theory Accelerated is the company that makes Axiom, but what we decided to do is to open up a studio dedicated just for learning. So what we're going to be doing is, and we're partnering up with Side Effects on this, and we're going to be creating all of the learning materials for free. So one of the next workshops that's coming out is going to be the kind of the blockbuster cinematic blockbuster effects that I'm doing together with Fabian Novak. It's going to be very awesome. And like I said, all of the training here is going to be for free. And it's not online yet. It's going to be online, I think, when this presentation is live as well. But yeah, it's coming, and we're very excited. Our main goal is to actually just make cool projects, almost like projects that you would see in a studio, and just release the training for free so everybody can see how a studio pipeline would look like. That's it.
Any questions?
That was an amazing presentation, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
My question was, have you ever experimented with unusual emitter shapes, and were there any that like worked out for you that wasn't really like maybe a realistic explosion, but something that you found really interesting there?
So unrealistic in what way?
Like I saw how the emitters pretty much looked like small explosions, and those kind of made bigger explosions. Like,
sure.
Did you ever try doing like donuts or rings or triangles or like pyramids, and something that maybe you wouldn't see, but it created an interesting effect?
I haven't, but if you want a donut explosion, then yeah, I would use a donut for sure. Yeah. No, but I haven't. I usually just try to make it, because you want the initial shapes to kind of look like an explosion from the beginning. But so let's say if you use a donut, I would just use a ton of pressure, and that's gonna blow it up immediately. Could work, 100%, yeah. But I usually tend to do more directional shapes from the beginning, just so it's the whole idea of shaping explosions with the emitter as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sweet.
Thanks again for the great talk. I'm really curious about how you arrived at the concept of using grains for that initial shaping of the blast.
Yeah.
Is it something that you sort of saw in reference material, or is it a sort of a pure art direction approach where you just decided you wanted that kind of sticky, clumpy look?
Yeah.
How did you get to that?
Well, first I kind of saw it back in the day, like I said, with the ILM presentation, they were using particles. And from particles, I went to using RBD simulations, and then from RBD I went to grains, and kind of each of those was just getting better and better and giving me more organic looking results. But yeah, at the beginning, at the very beginning, I was just using spheres, like expanding spheres with some noise as my emitters. But then as I progressed, I was kind of very inspired by the ILM presentation. And then I was using particles for a long time, and then kind of the grains I feel like are almost like the final step. I don't know what else I could actually do, but because it really gives you that, like I said, controlling chaos kind of mindset. So yeah.
If I can just follow up, because that effect can leave can have heavy clumps on the outside while leaving gaps in the middle. Do you ever find a problem where the explosion feels like it's sort of growing too much out in the air while leaving a hollow pocket behind it? How do you solve that?
Well, you can add more pressure, just more pressurized. Or more density or more temperature. Or you can, like I was showing at the, I'll just go back. Where was it? You can combine them, right? So here, all of these three emitters were then combined to get this. So maybe if you get some hollow pockets, you just add another one that's more centralized, and that's going to fill up the whole thing. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, sweet.
All great stuff. I love the visuals on this. You keep referencing about the 1 minute explosion and how 2 minutes, sub 2 minute sims, which is amazing. I think as a point of reference, what GPU are you using? I saw GTX in the corner at one point.
I have a 3090, which is pretty good, not the fastest one, but the 4090 is twice as fast on Axiom. So anything that I do, and if I call it a 1 minute explosion, it's actually half a minute on the 4090. So I kind of need to get a better GPU, I guess.
Or more of them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm.
Any plans to do water next? All right, I'll take that.
I cannot confirm or deny that we're developing a water solver.
I just had a question on in terms of if you have a method or way that you establish scale for your explosions. Like, do you have a certain? Do you stick with real world scale, or do you do a certain other type of procedure to get the scale of the look of your explosions?
Yeah, I tend to stick with real life scale. I'm trying to do nuclear explosions now, and it's real. It kind of doesn't real scale does like it breaks everything if you go real scale. So for nuclear explosions, I tend to, like for this one, I tend to fake it a bit. You want to see it one more time? So this one, it was just not in real scale. This would be huge, like, I don't know, a few kilometers. And I was just faking it with the speed and the shapes and everything. But in most cases, I would use real scale, yeah, as much as I can.
I was just curious about exactly about the how pressure is simulated in Axiom. I know you probably can't tell us exactly, but
it's just expansion. What is it called?
Is it a particle
divergence?
Field or?
Yeah, if you know divergence from pyro, it's
sorry.
But pressure is the same as divergence in pyro. It's kind of the expansion, like the natural expansion that happens in an explosion. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I cannot go into too much detail, but if you just download Axiom, try it, and then play with the pressure parameter, you'll see what it does.
No more questions? The rings that are around your nuclear explosion, is that like a post thing?
Yeah, post,
sort of
yeah.
Arbitrary.
Yep.
Okay.
Literally, it was a sphere. I used a Boolean to get a few slices, animated them, and that's it. I did use the main explosion as like I was vecting it, but it's all post. It's not actually in one set. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Urban.
No. You don't get a question.
We already said last question. You can talk to him at the bar later.
No, but if you really have a question,
No, we don't have time. We have to move on. But thank you very much. Urban came to us all the way from Slovenia. Thank you very much for making the trip.